My name's Darren. I'm from the north of Ireland, but I'm based in Belfast.
Awesome. So let's dive into the drinking story, shall we? Did it begin in your teens? When did you start drinking?
Yeah, it was my teenage years. I probably started drinking, Janet. I remember my first drink. I was actually about 13, and it was just a group of friends from school, and they had alcohol. I still remember the very first one. I think it was called VHF. I drank that, and then it just from there, it really started to pick up when I started heading towards my later teens, around 16, 17. I would have drank a social aspect. But it was really when I started becoming a legal age of drinking around 18 in the UK, it really started going up a notch because I was able to get more freedom from my parents to go out and do those things. When I got that freedom to go and do, it just escalated. And yeah, it went the whole way up until nearly every weekend from about 18 to about 29 of just constant every single weekend. When I went to university, I didn't think it could go up a notch, but it did. Um,
Well, that's the
then
double whammy university, isn't it? You're away from home, so you've got the freedom and you want to fit in with all these new people. So drinking is the obvious way.
exactly. It was the fastest way, and the most accessible, and it worked all right
Yeah.
because I made friends overnight, basically. But yeah, it started spiraling when I got back to Northern Ireland because I was back home with more like-minded people, shall we say, in terms of the alcohol. The difference between here and England is that in England they were wrapping it up around 2 or 3. We go to bed, you wake up and you talk about the next night. But here it's not 2 or 3, it's 2 or 3 the next day. Then it could potentially go on for another day or two after that. And anybody that's listening to this that's from Northern Ireland will probably understand. I think it's just a culture. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
um, everybody seemed to do it, so I did it as well. But
Yeah. So a hard drinker through your 20s, really, Darren. Did you manage to keep the show on the road where you, like me, are functioning alcoholic?
do you know, there was at some stage you could have seen me as that, but now when I look back, there was one very specific moment, and you could maybe say possibly this would be a rock bottom, but I was after a really heavy nights drinking with my friends, and we were doing drugs. Must have been for 2 or 3 days or something, and then I came back, and this is when the behavior problems started happening, where I wasn't paying my rent on time. I was lying to my flatmates saying I was paying it, knowing full well that I wasn't. And it was all just to protect that image that I could still go out and party. If I could keep this lie going as long as possible, I could go out and continue to party. But it was starting to really get on top of me. All these lies to my partner when we had first started going out at that stage. And then my friends starting to get letters to the door from the estate agent saying, look, there's rent missing. What is going on? Then it started to pile up,
Yeah.
which then I went out and partied more and more. There was one night specifically, it was pouring rain in Belfast. I remember just coming back from 2 or 3 days of drinking. Then I just walked and I just kept walking. There was torrential rain. And I suppose that could have been my rock bottom that moment then, but that was number of years, Janet, before I stopped actually drinking or consuming alcohol.
Yeah. It sounds like it was in the back of your mind that you were worried about it for a number of years and you were drinking to chase those worries away, weren't you?
Absolutely. Oh, I couldn't agree anymore. It's a great way of putting it because the house of cards comes crashing down
Yeah.
eventually. I always put it down to, oh, it's just culture. It's just what we
Mm.
do. We're from Northern Ireland. We party, we drink, we go out, we enjoy. And then couple that with the type of music we were listening to, and it was reinforcing all that behavior.
Yeah.
But again, it was entirely down to me. But there's a lot of things for such a young age and a young mind to
Mm.
take on board. So alcohol was an easy escape route for me at that point.
Absolutely. And it's so easy, as you say, to convince ourselves everybody drinks a lot. I'm just work hard, play hard type of person. But yeah, that walk in the rain, it sounds quite sad. And I think you were almost punishing yourself there, weren't you? One of our members is a runner. And she told me that whenever she had a big night, the next morning she would be up at 6 and she would run, and she would run harder and faster than usual. And there'd be tears coming down her face because she just felt so bad. But she was running almost as a punishment to herself. So we get ourselves in all sorts of weird loops, don't we? So did you try and take breaks? Did you do dry January to convince yourself you didn't have a problem like I used to do?
No, I go on because I was living with my friends and it was one for all kind of thing. It was only Janet when I started getting older and when I moved in with my partner that it really started to play out. I was going from being a boy in my head to who was always at university and doing things or like and drinking and partying and drowning away how I felt. But I was transitioning into being a fully fledged adult at this stage. I always kept one foot in the past, and I found that very difficult to close that gap. It took me many years to close that gap. There was periods of time when it was getting quite serious, and my partner was saying, "Look, something needs to give. This can't keep continue. Can't keep going out for 2, 3 days at a time." I understood that, so I would make up rules. I'll drink if there's a wedding coming up, and I say the wedding's in May, and I had 2 or 3 events before that, I would look at those events systematically and I would
Mm.
go, okay, if I don't drink at this next 2 events, then I'll have 3 months under my belt and then I could definitely drink at that wedding and vice versa. This went on for about 2 years before I started to decide enough's enough.
Yeah.
But
So you were very strategic, really. I used to do that. I would look at my diary on a Monday morning and I'd think, okay, I've got a couple of lunches, so let's make sure there's nothing going on in the afternoon.
yep,
It's madness.
exactly.
So was there a moment when you thought this has got to change?
Yep, absolutely. It was a few years ago. It's quite a funny story now when I look back at it, but I was a wedding. Shock, shock there. I might have had maybe 4, maybe 5 months of alcohol free living at that point, but it wasn't intentional. I felt like I was being forced into it based on my past experiences. Um, so we went to this wedding. Me and my partner was a person that was associated with my partner. It was actually one of her closest friends. I think it was her brother getting married, so very close. They've known each other for a long time. I went there with the best intentions. I'll have 1 or 2 drinks. That didn't go too well, so I got completely blackout drunk to the point where I was walking around and I was having conversations with people, but that wasn't me. I don't know who that was,
Mm.
but it wasn't Darren. The next morning, I got up, obviously my head splitting, banging, and I thought, oh, the last night went great. I went in, spoke to my partner, and no, it didn't go great. The look on her face, I'm surprised the paint didn't start boiling on the walls. She was that angry. Then it started coming back to me a little bit more, and I took the dog for a walk. So I started recollecting what I was doing, jumped up, nearly destroyed equipment for the wedding band. It cost thousands and thousands of pounds. I was standing on people's feet. I was never aggressive. I was more of a very happy go lucky, but I was to the point where I was embarrassing myself. The next day, I took the dog for a walk down the country lane. And it was this moment where I thought to myself, I have to make a choice here. It's either just keep drinking alcohol or I'll lose my relationship. There's your choice, very clear. And I really sat back and contemplated, what has it actually given me? What has alcohol given me, really? It was on the car journey back up to our home again. My girlfriend turned around and says to me, maybe you might want to consider that you might have an issue with alcohol. At that moment, it hit me like a ton of bricks, Janet. I felt it in every single cell in my body. The only reason I felt it now is because it was true. It was only the fact that I didn't want to admit the fact that it was true, and that's why I was so much battling over the years of
Oh,
back and forth,
totally.
back and
Yeah.
forth. So
Yeah. We go through this thing with our subconscious, don't we? We know in our hearts and our minds we've got to stop. But then we're thinking, how will I have fun? What will I do at the wedding, etc., etc. So we have all this inner turmoil and it's exhausting. Yeah, the blackouts, what you said about the blackout was interesting. When we're in that state, when we're not really ourselves, as you put it, and then somebody that knows us well, like our partner, is looking at us, our eyes are not right, they're vacant.
you're there, but you're not there at
Yeah,
the same time. It's like
yeah,
somebody else is taking over your
yeah,
body and you're just
yeah.
moving and operating. You'll sound and talk and be like you, but you're not. basically I figured out my brain was so soaked in
Yeah.
alcohol
Yeah.
that it just shut off. It was like, if I don't shut down here and go to sleep or something, you could possibly die. And that's the crazy part about it.
Yeah.
It was
It's like a curtain comes down, isn't it? It is frightening what we do to our brain with alcohol. A doctor told me a while ago that if I'd have carried on having those kind of blackouts, the walking, talking blackouts, as I call them, I probably would have got brain damage because it's really dangerous.
that makes real sense because it's just wiping out everything in your
Yeah.
brain. There's no
Yeah.
function, there's no movement, there's no coordination.
Yeah. So, how did you manage to do it? How did you ditch the booze?
It was actually after that wedding, and I went, okay, I'm going to have to maybe look into this. And I was listening to a few podcasts, but it was yourself, the podcast that I clocked onto the fastest. I, it was a podcast around rules or something like that, and that really resonated with me. I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And that's when I signed up for it's not the boot camp. It's about 3 hours long. It was with yourself, Lynette, Lucy was on there.
Oh, masterclass.
Yes,
You came to the workshop and then you just stopped. I was thrilled.
that's it. Exactly. I was fascinated by the actual alcohol itself. I was like, oh, I didn't know it did this. I didn't know it did that. And then that just hooked me. And I just followed the Tribe Sober steps. I did the Quitlet. I did the journaling. I tried to attend as many Zoom meetings as I could to build that connection. I stayed on the WhatsApps. And I think one of the main things, Jan, that helped me a lot was the self curiosity. I think because all the other stuff was really good and it helped me learn about alcohol, especially the Quitlet. It was phenomenal. And I can't highly recommend enough Alcohol Explained 1 and 2. Those two books alone was a huge trajectory for me to really understand what alcohol does, because I have that mindset where I need to understand what it is.
Yeah.
And then I can go, oh, okay, so this is why it does this and this is why it does that. Then it helps me paint the picture more in my head. It was understanding why I drank. What was it about my environment? What was it about my self-esteem that opened up a whole can of worms? And you've always mentioned this, Janet, and that it's not actually drinking. What is underneath the
Yeah,
iceberg?
it's a symptom, isn't it, of other things going on. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Thanks, Darren. Yeah. And the knowledge thing, reading William Porter's books there. Because none of us really know about alcohol. We just get pulled into it as young people and then it becomes this deeply entrenched habit. But how many people out there really know that it's linked to 7 types of cancer and more than 60 diseases? This stuff is a toxin. Globally, 3 million people die every year of alcohol related causes. If you contrast that with COVID times, when 3 million people died in 1 year and the whole world came to a halt, we all had to stay in our houses. The governments were on TV every night with their graphs and flow charts. But every year, that same number of people die from alcohol related causes and nothing ever changes. It's mind boggling when you think about it. I believe that this stuff should be taught in school, just the basics, what alcohol does to your body. It's not going to stop young people drinking, but if they're just aware that it's not completely harmless, because that's what we think, don't we? We just think it's our magic potion to have fun and get confidence.
Absolutely. That's what I thought as well. I thought, oh, this is just something I do. This is something that I suppose I bond over with friends. We can maybe talk about things. I suppose men have this stigma around that we don't really share feelings, but we probably do, but we just do it in maybe different contexts. I suppose alcohol was that kind of lubricant in order to maybe share some things or talk a little bit more, or to just be along with other people. But then when you actually realize what alcohol does, because it wipes out your brain basically, it can form new memories. So you're not actually remembering what you said. There is times I'm speaking to some of my friends from back home and they'd be like, oh, do you remember? So I have no recollection. And I was there for the whole time and there's not a single
Yeah.
point in my brain that I could go. And that just to me now is that memory's gone. Do you ever see those old time cameras or where the film bubbles up on the heat? You might see it in a movie or something. It just disintegrates and vanishes. There's probably so many amazing times that I've had with my friends, just little micro moments of joy, and it's just been gone. And it's just simply because we've consumed a chemical that's really.
Yeah, a mind-altering chemical.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about your long-suffering partner. I've got one of those as well. Is she a happy woman these days?
Yes, I believe so. She had probably not the brightest hope that I was going to stop consuming alcohol, which is fair enough. That's her reality. But since then, she's super proud because I stuck with it and I've stuck with it
Yeah.
ever since. And I've really changed my whole outlook on alcohol and how I see it
Yeah.
and how I see life, basically in general. One of the things that really struck a chord with me is she said, I fell in love with you again.
That's
And
lovely.
that
Yeah.
really meant everything to me. That
Probably felt that she'd got Darren back.
Do you know what, Janice? I'm honest. Had she ever really got Darren because I was masking a huge amount of
Mm.
self-esteem problems, really pushing that down. The floodgates started opening, and I started becoming a lot more curious about myself and going, okay, this is quite interesting. Yeah, I started finding out what I like and what I don't like, and I was like, why did I not figure this out before?
So huge congrats to you for getting this at such a tender age.
Thank you.
I just wondered what your contemporaries say when you meet guys your age and you tell them you don't drink. Are you under pressure still?
Do you know, at the very beginning, especially with my friends, a little bit of banter between us would have exchanged places. But I've always been very open about how I'm feeling. And there's times where I have had real nights out, for example, and I've woke up the next morning crying. And I've just wrote to them and texted them and says, look, guys, I'm not going to be out for a while. I don't know what's wrong. I suppose you could call it anxiety, depression, things like that. Now I understand the chemical, what it does to your brain chemically. It makes total sense. But in terms of now, no, they're all actually very supportive. And again, one of my friends who was a heavy drinker, he says, I give you a little bit of banter back and forth, but he says, honestly, you should be really proud of yourself because you're doing something that not a lot of people do. And yeah, so when I say to people that I don't drink, it's wow, fair play to you, congratulations. And one of my mother closest mates, he's actually stopped drinking as well. I think maybe because I had given it up, or I don't like using the word giving it up because it means I'm giving up something. I just
Good
stopped
point.
consuming
Mm.
something that wasn't good for me. It wasn't giving me anything. Yeah, he was really buzzing with it, and he now is doing his own thing. And I don't think he has consumed alcohol for about 3, maybe 4 months. And it was
Yeah.
nothing that I said or done.
We influence people, especially someone your age. He will have been thinking, wow. And what we've done here is something that most of the population don't even think about doing. It doesn't even cross their radar. They drink, and that's just how life is. We're lucky. As that quick lit book, I don't know if you've read it, Laura McCowan, she says we are the luckiest. I so agree with her that we are lucky because we've been forced to the wall and forced to a crisis, and then we've had to rebuild our lives, and we've rebuilt happier and healthier lives. So it's all good. So, Darren, how many years of sobriety have you got now?
I am coming up to 2 years this month, actually.
Wow.
So the 23rd. And it's weird that because my anniversary of me and my partner is the 23rd. Yeah, nearly 2 years, but I haven't looked back. There's nothing that alcohol can give me that I haven't already got. And now I realize that alcohol just took everything that I
Yeah.
did have
Yeah.
away from me.
Yeah.
And then I wondered why I didn't have any self-esteem. I created this character created from this lack of self-esteem, but it wasn't really me. It was like this identity had its own thought pattern, its own behavioral pattern, its own way of perceiving the world, its own way of interacting with the world, interacting with people. Only now, when I've started to dissolve through that second identity, there was nothing wrong with me in the first place. It's fascinating to be honest.
Yeah.
It's
I think our self esteem is on the floor when we've got a problem with drinking. And one of the many joys of sobriety is we can rebuild our self esteem. And you said your partner, your parents, I'm sure, are all proud of you. And that feeling makes us feel proud of ourselves. So it gives us courage and it gives us confidence. I think there's also this feeling that, wow, I've done this really hard thing that most of the population wouldn't even dream of doing. So, what other hard things can I do? Bring them on. So, we get more confident and more able to try new things. And we have more time and more money to do that, don't we?
Absolutely. I agree totally.
We have to think about what we lose when we give up drinking and what we gain. What have you lost since you've stopped drinking?
Self-loathing would be one of them, and feeling like a victim all the time. That was a big one for me. Everything's against me. The world's out to get me. This bad things happen, and that's just me. That was me being in a victim mentality and not seeing the empowerment that I had. One thing I gained, where do I start? I gained myself first and foremost.
Yeah.
As I said, it was like almost a second identity was created that walked around in my
Mm.
shoes for whatever length of time that might have been because of my self-esteem problems. Then just in regards to the clarity, you're able to see things in the world a lot clearer and a lot sharper. Your thought process and your self-compassion as well, and self-empathy, I think are basically superpowers. Sometimes we neglect them and then we turn to self-destructive behaviors in order
Yeah.
to compensate for that lack of not believing that we're good enough. But just being born, which I've come to realize is you are good enough, and that's all
Yes.
the evidence you need.
So let's talk about coaching. Why did coaching appeal to you? Why did you think, yeah, I'd like to have a go at that?
I think because I had a really good grasp of alcohol in terms of what it does through my own knowledge. And it was really just developing a system that worked for me and coaching myself. Then I thought to myself, if I can maybe do this, could I possibly help somebody else to do it as well? That was the real push off point, and I started getting really interested in it. Then I listened to your podcast with Dave and Susan that I trained with, and their outlook aligned with how I seen it.
Hmm.
I think the language they used around being powerful and empowering, I think that was really touching to me because the way I look at it, if, for example, a footballer or a sports person goes out and breaks their legs and they'll go through a period of time, well, they'll go through a recovery period of like rehabilitation and they'll do whatever they need to do. And that'll go on for a period of months until the doctors or whoever it might be gives them the all clear to go ahead and start playing again. But you don't ever hear of a player or a sports athlete saying, "Oh, they're in recovery for the rest of their lives." I don't believe no.
No.
Once they're recovered, yes, they have to manage it. They make sure they're not putting so much strain or pressure, whatever it might be. But that's it. They go off and do their own thing, and that's how I view it. So I try to bring that interest and that way of looking at it across into coaching, and ideally start helping people and make
Yeah,
that change or that
that's a
growth.
beautiful analogy, actually, Darren, because that's where I didn't really get on with AA because I tried AA, but they told me basically I'd have to go to meetings for the rest of my life. And I was thinking, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd be sitting next to people that had been there for 30 years. And like you, I don't believe we need 30 years to recover.
Oh,
That football injury analogy is a very good one. Yes. So let's heal. I think it takes 3 months really of hard work to get that healing. And then after that, just as you say, we have to manage it. We can then get on and explore other things and start building a different kind of life, a healthier and happier life. So, yeah, that's a great analogy. I imagine you had to do plenty of pro bono coaching to get your qualification with Dave and Susan.
yes, that's been in the process over the last couple of weeks, thanks to so many people in Tribe Sober for giving me their time and their patience. It's been really an awesome experience just connecting with people because I think that's one of the main things that I wanted to do is just connect with people because it can sometimes feel a little bit isolating, especially if you're in a maybe in a group of people that don't understand the benefits. That's their reality, and I get that's just something they haven't looked into. But it can be a lonely road. So it's always great to maybe speak to other people and get there, have great conversations, interesting conversations, again, like this one, and just seeing where they're at, but more importantly, where they want to go to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key.
I think their book is called Recovery, It's a Brain Thing. I
Yeah.
like the fact that they bring neuroscience into this because it's big, isn't it? Alcohol rewires our brain. And the exciting thing is that sobriety can heal that damage. I don't know if you heard the podcast that I did with a professor of neuroscience. She told me that our brains play a symphony because there's so many different moving parts in our brain. It's like an orchestra. Then if we become dependent on alcohol or drugs, that symphony is all over the place, lots of discordant notes, and it's not performing as it should do. Then I asked her, as I always ask the neuroscientist, what happens when we stop drinking? She said, yes, your brain will heal and you'll begin to play a new symphony. And she said, and that symphony might very well be even more beautiful than the original symphony. I thought that was lovely. What a nice, hopeful
I
analogy
totally
there.
agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree. I couldn't agree anymore. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It just it heals itself and our body heals itself and everything starts to function. I think when we're consuming alcohol, we're always so tired, we're exhausted. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just so tired. Maybe I didn't sleep enough.
Yeah.
You didn't sleep enough because you consumed something that's not allowing you to sleep.
And over the years, all those damaged nights of sleep, but it really mounts up. So you get this constant fatigue and you almost get used to feeling below par. I was getting older and I just thought, oh, this is what being old is like. But now I'm much older and I've got my energy back. So the sleep is a big one, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I was the exact same. I would just be tired all the time. And I'd be
Yeah,
like, why am
me
I so
too.
tired? But now I look back and I'm like, if I just done it a little bit sooner. But again, you can't look at it like that way. I only
No.
had the information when I did, and I just
Yeah.
move on with that.
Yeah. In a way, there's a blessing to having gone through this crisis because it makes us curious about ourselves. You never would have developed that curiosity probably if you'd managed to be a moderate drinker. So those guys that we were jealous of for all those years, maybe we're luckier than they are because they don't think about ditching it because they feel they don't need to. So they don't get this opportunity to be alcohol free and appreciate all the benefits.
Absolutely. That
Yeah.
reminds me, Janet, of a quote of Peter Crone. He's a coach for a lot of athletes
Hmm.
and quite ultra high net worth people. But he says, everything happened the way it did because it did. And you
Yeah.
don't need any more evidence for that
Yeah.
than that. I completely agree with that. That's very powerful. So
Yeah. I agree too. How can someone get in touch with you if they'd like to try your coaching? They can have a discovery session, I imagine, a short conversation and take it from
yeah,
there.
yeah, absolutely, Janet. They can reach out to me, pauserecovery.com, pauserecovery.com.
PAUSE.
Yeah,
Okay.
recovery.com. The reason why it's called pause is because of Viktor Frankl.
Ah,
His
yes.
theory around there's a circumstance and then there's a reaction, but the point in the middle is where you have the power. So that's the reason why it's called pause recovery.
So if
Most
someone's
definitely.
listening to this, Darren, and they know that they've got to stop drinking, but they feel a bit overwhelmed by the whole topic and they've got no idea how to get started, what would you say to them? Have you got any tips to share?
First off, Janet, if they're listening to this podcast, that's the first step. They've brought
Yep.
awareness. Fair play to them and really well done. I'm thinking from my own journey, it was listening to podcasts. And then maybe on that podcast, you might listen to somebody that has a little snippet of information or maybe a little bit of science, or perhaps they might mention a book or a podcast or people on Instagram or YouTube. It starts to spiral and compound over time. It's not perfection, it's just progress. It will start snowballing and you'll get stronger, you'll get more interested in it. I think one of the things, Janet, for me is being really self curious. I think that
Yeah.
is the key to long term sustainability. I like to phrase it in terms of, would you like alcohol abstinence or would you like alcohol freedom?
And reframing it is so powerful as well. Because that word abstinence, it implies willpower. And of course, this isn't about
Exactly.
willpower, it's about a mindset, isn't it?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's just reprogramming your subconscious mind that going from alcohol is everything to really seeing for what it is. It's just a substance that alters your mind and it doesn't give you a very content life.
It's about taking our power back as well, isn't it? From all this marketing bullshit we see from the liquor industry and the peer pressure as well. So once we can see through all that, it loses its power, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big key for me as well.
Anything else you'd like to mention, Darren, before I pull the plug on you?
I've been thinking a lot about, again, self-curiosity and into the past is like a lot of people think that we can't change the past and we get caught up a lot in the past because it's a huge part of our lives. I think we can change the past because our past exists in our mind and we simply perceive the past as a certain thing. But because it exists in our mind, we can change our perception. Because we can change our perception, we can change our mind. So we can change how we view the past.